personal because now Ulrik is called Pontus. Because I'm not sharing my screen, right? I'm viewing Pontus Nodge's screen.
Yes.
But that's not my screen.
Oh well, it's a
broke
nice
the
name.
system.
I'm sure Ulrik don't mind. Let's see if you can you rename? Is it possible to rename yourself? I think I can. Okay, so I've allowed, okay, so it's new security features of Zoom, but I've allowed people to rename themselves now. So
okay,
hopefully be able to, to do that.
Well, now we know.
Yeah, and I think possibly that the YouTube stream is working as well.
Oh. So I'm gonna share it on.
Yes, let me post your link.
Perfect.
I wonder if they're shutting down this tab. Oh, well, okay, Ulrik. So I guess we'll wait a few minutes here and let people join.
Oh, I have my own name.
Yes. Didn't you like Pontus?
Well, felt like an imposter.
Yeah. Yeah, there's only one Pontus.
Yeah. Let's see if I can share again then. Did you post the YouTube link in Discord for everyone?
No, oh, you can do that, Corbin. I just tweeted it now.
Yes, I will do that. We'll do that. I think I can also actually post that on Twitter because, or maybe you can do that, Pontus, because I think it's hard. I don't think you can zoom on people from YouTube.
Oh, exactly. I just posted a link on
cool.
Twitter now.
Excellent. I guess everyone has been practicing video meetings now with Corona.
Yep.
So we'll need at least somebody to forget to turn off their microphone and then kind of scold their kid or something. That's been a common theme where I'm at right now. Some kid coming down and making like breakfast at the same time as the morning meet.
How do I get the chat?
It should be in the bottom bar, right next to participants and share screen. Yes, testing, excellent. So I guess we'll wait just a few more minutes and see if more people join, and then we'll go ahead and kick things off. really glad the YouTube stream actually works. Step up from last time.
Yeah. Does that mean we will have a VOD saved by default as well?
Sorry, do you mean
choose to? Yeah, so as a video on demand, like the live stream can be saved. Instantly.
No clue actually.
Okay.
So it's the entire event is recorded via Zoom, but I'm not sure if the actual YouTube stream is. If you can say that yourself.
Okay. Yeah, we'll see.
Yep.
But still, we're gonna sort the videos out later, actually post them properly.
Yeah,
each one.
Exactly. The usual drill.
Yeah, the iMovie intro.
The professional iMovie editing. Okay, so I guess we can get started introducing the event now, I think.
Yeah, seems good.
Yeah. Excellent. I'm just keeping track of I gotta let people in manually here, so I'm keeping track of the participants list.
Okay. Okay, should I kick it off?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Pontus, also known as Pixelero on the internets, and welcome to ReasonSTHLM. This is our third remote meetup. We have 3 presentations today. First, we'll have, oh no, the description here is wrong. Sorry, give me a sec. I'm just gonna cheat here. Okay, so the first presentation will be native web with a library or framework called Morph by Ulrik Strid. It's a tiny framework for developing HTTP stuff. Our next talk will be by Kirill. Talk about adopting ReasonML in existing code bases using gentype. And our last presentation will be building GraphQL driven UI using suspense and concurrent mode with React and Reason Relay on the bleeding edge.
Everything's experimental. There's no stable code involved.
Yeah, so that'll be great.
Yeah, and that'll be more of a kind of it won't be a presentation as much as just a very like live code kind of thing. So yeah, just want to set the expectation bar.
And this event is this is the first time we actually have a live stream set up on YouTube. We just tweeted the link out on the ReasonSTHLM Twitter account. And we will, if it's okay with the presenters, also put up separate videos on the ReasonConf YouTube channel later with a proper title and all of that. And I think that's all, unless anyone has any questions. And feel free to use the chat during the presentations. I'll try to monitor it and sneak in questions as I see fit during the presentation. And also maybe the presenter will read the chat. It's up to them really. But if there's something that people like really don't understand, that's like blocking to understand the presentation, please tell us so, and we can try to sort it out. Okay, perfect. So our first presentation is, as we have said, developing native web applications using Morph by Ulrik Strid. So Ulrik, take it away.
Yes. Hello. My name is Ulrik Strid, and I've been in the Reason community since 2017, I think. I have 2 kids and 1 wife, and I work at a company named Zenit in Gothenburg. And I'm Ulrik Strid on most places. I'm going to go through shortly what I do at Zenit here as well. So I'm in Team DevOps, and we're doing some in-house projects. We're developing a identity provider, which is mostly a OpenID Connect provider on top of Swedish and Norwegian bank ID. And then we're doing a portal for our customers where they can handle licenses and stuff like that. And the front end there is written in Reason React. We're also doing some external development, helping customers with architecture questions and even building smaller services that fits into their whole service network or whatever. And we're also doing a lot of developer experience, helping teams be more productive. And we're helping them host Kubernetes as a service and more. And we're hiring if you live in Gothenburg. So please reach out to me if you're interested. So Reason Native Web. Reason Native Web is a collection of repositories on GitHub, where we have Morph, which is a web framework. We have a vendor repository that tries to eliminate resolutions when working with Morph and other web-related stuff in Reason. We also have a few templates to help you get started quickly with Morph development. We have Docker repository with some images for easy with different Ocaml versions and some libraries like Morph, etc. So it's like 3 layers that you can just easily get started with. You don't have to do it all the tedious setup. We want to have guides for Docker, but we currently don't have them because we're not sure exactly how we want to structure them. And you can find everything on GitHub under the Reason Native Web organization. Any questions so far? Nothing in the chat at least, so I'm moving forward. So let's talk about Morph then. It's a lightweight framework. It's built on top of Piaf from Antonio Montero, which started as a HTTP client, but Antonio also needed a server implementation, so we added that. And when I found out, I switched over Morph to use that instead of my own implementation because I don't want to handle those lower level details. So I'm using Piaf in the bottom, and then I'm adding some opinions and nice to have things on top. And we have smaller modules like sessions that are in the box. We also have a router and some other nice things, but yeah. We also have a separate package that is GraphQL-server, which is based on Ocaml-graphql-server, and it just makes it very easy to integrate with it. So you just build out your schema, and then you get a working GraphQL servers. And the development is driven from what I and others need while developing applications. So it's moving slowly because I'm developing a bit on Morph, and then I'm trying to build things with it. And then I go back to it because I find something that I want Morph to handle for me. So any questions on what Morph is? Or are we good so far? This is moving really fast. Nice. So this is a very simple web server in Morph. First, you create the server with a port, and then you start it. We take in a list of servers for historical reasons. before I moved over to Piaf, you could have multiple servers, and you could have one for HTTPS and one for HTTP, and then we started everything together and used the same handler and the same middlewares for everything, which was cool, but I don't want to maintain that. So yeah, and this also shows the static middleware that I recently added to Morph, which, so you say, everything that comes in with the path public should return files that are located in the public folder. And then we have the router, which obviously uses the routes library. So I'm not sure if I can use a pointer here somehow. So these things are routes. I will show more on this later, but basically this says that the string GraphQL and then nothing more should point to the graphical handler. And if there's nothing or just a slash, we will do the hello world handler. And a handler is in Morph is just a request to a response. And then we wrap it in a LWT promise. I see there's a question here. Is Morph thought to be something more like Rails or something more like Sinatra, like the design philosophy? I think it's going to be more like Sinatra, but the more things I need, maybe it will be more Rails-like, but I try to keep my opinions to a minimum, and hopefully someone can add even more opinions on top. And what's Sinatra? It's a web framework in Ruby, I guess, which doesn't have very many opinions. It's basically just a router and web server, I think. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Another cool feature that we have in native web development is the Tyxml, or how you do say it, which is typed HTML. And with the new JSX PPX, you can write HTML that looks like HTML and get it type checked at compile time, which is pretty baller, actually. I will try to demo everything here later, so yeah. And then we have the Ocaml-graphql-server, where you do code first development. So you define a user object with the field ID, name, and email, which will take in, then you have the resolve function that takes info and the actual type, which is a user in this case. And then how do you return the ID, name, and email? Yeah. Someone else might be better at explaining these parts than I am. So now there's demo time. If you want to follow along, you can actually npm install easy and pc, and then you create a directory, cd into that, and then run pc template ReasonNative web Morph GraphQL-server pc template, because it's the longest name in the world. I can paste everything here in the chat. So if someone is interested in actually doing this, they can follow along. I'm going to change what I'm sharing here, if at all possible.
Can I? We actually have a question from the YouTube chat, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Someone asked, why is it so hard to read the schema?
Well, how do you explain this? Well, it's code first, as was said, which means that you define the schema in actual code that will run your server, but it will also generate everything in a type-safe way. But yeah, it's not like the GraphQL SDL or other simpler things. Maybe, yeah, like Jem Turan said that there's an open issue about using STL syntax. I'm not really sure how that will work because you still need the resolvers, etc. But maybe that's possible somehow. Yeah. I'm going to try to bootstrap everything like I showed in the last slide there. So I'm going to try to share the terminal, or maybe I can do portion of my screen shared instead. Yeah, let's see here. So if we have EC and we have PC, we can do PC. Oh, I need to create a folder, obviously.
Yes, the question for the chat, can everyone see the font? Is it big enough?
I can zoom it a bit, I think.
That should be good. It's good for me at least.
Yep. So now that we have a folder, we can do PC template. I can paste this into the chat as well. So this just points to my template. I lost the chat somewhere. Okay,
yeah,
so
for the viewers,
the chat.
PC is a tool to make basically using easy even easier, right?
Yeah, so it will
No
be
pun intended.
more familiar for JavaScript developers. And the pun was initially that you would run easy PC, and then you would have all your development needs. Okay, so we're getting more things here. Okay, since I already have everything built, it just built. But a really cool thing about PC is that if you don't have everything built, it will actually ask you, do you want to warm up your cache from our CI environment? And then you can just press yes, and then it will download all the needed packages and put them in your EC store. And then you can just run EC, and then it will be basically instantly built like this. And then you're good to go, which is pretty cool. Okay, so now we have the project going. I will try to zoom here a bit. We have a bin directory. Okay. I'm closing this. Yeah, so this is just some basic logging setup. I'm not 100% sure about everything, but this at least says that we're only interested in the info logs. And then we say that we want a GraphQL handler. I will show the schema a bit later. And then we want a graphical handler, which will use a Tyxml renderer. So we'll see the type-safe HTML generation as well. We have some routes where we want GraphQL to give us the graphical thing. And then we have a very simple handler that just returns hello world. And then we have our post routes, which is the GraphQL handler that points to GraphQL, obviously. We try to read a port from the environment, or we would default to 50/50. And then we create our server with the port and say that we only want to listen on localhost and not everything. And then we start the server. Are there any questions so far?
We have a question in chat.
Yeah. To build a real-world app using Morph, are there any query builders or ORMs that are mostly used? I have personally not gotten that far because things I have built so far have not needed databases, but I've heard good things about PPX wrapper and the I can't remember what the underlying library is named, but maybe someone in the chat can answer that for me. Maybe Antonio, because I think he's using it. Cacti, that's right. So CAQTI. Yeah, okay, so we'll start from the Tyxml thing, because I think that's really cool. So here we just have normal HTML, at least that's what it looks like. But if I try to, let's see if I have my things set up correctly here. Can everyone see the terminal okay? Hopefully. So if I try to build this, oh, I just have to save it as well. And if I try to build this, I get a compilation error because a div cannot be the child of a paragraph, which makes sense, although the error is horrible, but maybe that can be fixed in what's called the thing that Facebook is building that helps you with errors. Yeah, so at least we get errors, and if I had my editor integration set up correctly, it would actually show that the P and the div doesn't match, so it would be red squiggles under the P tag, which is pretty cool. Any questions about Tyxml so far? It's a real bad demo that I can't show my editor integration. Maybe I can do this. No, because I only have that. Okay. I fucked up my environment earlier today, I think. So we also have the GraphQL, I thought. Maybe it's named something else. Okay, the schema. Okay, so here is the GraphQL schema that actually Jem Turan built for me some time ago, I think. At least he kickstarted this template that we're using now. So we define a user type that has an ID, name, and email, and then we stick them in a ref list. And then we create the schema that I showed earlier for a user. And then we have mutations where we can add users. It takes a name and email, and then we create a new user and put it first in the list. And then we return the new user. And then you can query users and user by ID. I will also show this live later. Maybe that's actually basically it. It might also be interesting to show that we can do more interesting stuff with the router. So if we have our demo route, we can say that, yeah, we want a string, I want an int, and then we want to end the route, and we want to send this to a handler that takes a name, number, and we don't care about the request. And then we return a, wait, I can close the files. Return a morph response text with name, string of int number. And then this should be type safe, because this says that we want a string and then we want specifically a integer, and it will parse it for us and convert it to an integer. And this underscore is just a morph request. Yeah, and we don't care about it because we're not using it. So if we do EC start, we will also print a routing table for you, which might be handy. And then we can show the GraphQL. I'm going to move the window. And here we actually have the GraphQL server that is running everything. I'm bad with GraphQL, but we should be able to do add user with name Pontus. And I don't know your email, but maybe like this.
First guess. That's impressive.
Oh, that's right. Must be mutation, right? Yeah. And then we should have users. Yay. Yeah, and we can also show that we have the demo Ulrich route, and it works as we would expect. And I don't think we can send whatever here. Yeah, because it will be 404 because it's not a number. So yeah, I think that's it for me. Hopefully someone gets interested in doing native development with Reason or Ocaml. Yeah. Thanks for listening to me ramble for a bit. If there's any more questions, ask them now or forever hold your peace.
Yes, thank you, Ulrich. We have a question with, there's always one person asking this question whenever someone shows code, and the question is, what is your VS Code theme?
It's Night Owl.
Night Owl. Yeah, and someone, this is from the YouTube chat, by the way, I'm monitoring that as well. And someone asked about the arrows, and I believe it's a font that supports the ligatures, right? So it's,
yeah, so I have Fira code.
Yeah, Fira code. Okay.
I understand that this is a bad demo, but
no.
The arrows are an @ sign and then 2 dashes and a less than or greater than sign, I guess. Less than, maybe.
And that's a defined infix operator from Morph, is it?
This is from the routes library.
Routes. Oh, okay. Cool.
So in Morph, we just have a convenient Morph router function that uses routes library under the hood, where you can give it get, post, put, and delete routes. And then you can tell it to print or not. It prints by default. Okay. This is where the routing table is coming from.
Yeah, I'm but a simple front-end developer. I actually started doing a bit of Express last week, and I'd much rather do this, but oh well. You have the
Well,
nice
we have
pointy arrows and
middlewares,
typesetting.
etc. So if you know some of Express, you might feel somewhat at home, at least.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ulrich. We have people in the YouTube chat thanking you as well. Lots of hearts and thumbs up. And unless anyone has any other question, I think that's it. So an applause for Ulrich.
Yeah, thank you.
Ulrich.
Thank you, Ulrich. Okay, I think should we do like a 5-minute like stretch, get yourself a drink?
Yeah. I think like we can, yeah, let's do 5 minutes, and then this time let's try not just shutting everything down, but if people want to talk to each other, feel free.
Yeah.
I think you're supposed to be able to unmute yourself this time. So if people want to hang around and just talk or chat or anything, just go ahead. I'm gonna also go get a drink. So, but I guess we'll see each other here in 5 minutes then. Yep.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool.
So there's a question in chat that I can answer here. Is there an alternative to Morph for HTTP web servers? And yes, there is the reweb from Javar Amin. That is pretty much like Morph, but it has some other decisions, I guess. There's also Opium that is also now based on HTTP AF, which is nice. Serbay is node-based, so it's not native, but it might be interesting as well for everyone that is in node land, so to speak. There's obviously Piaf that I'm building upon, if you want less of my opinions. I guess there is also Web Machine, and I'm not sure if Helium, or is that Oxygen, maybe? Oxygen is another one that's been around forever, I think. So there are a lot of alternatives. Morph is my take on things, but Reweb and Opium is probably much like it, because we all have middlewares and handlers and do it in almost the same way, I think. So basically everyone is just finding out their own path to whatever they like.
I'm curious about like Ocaml-graphql-server. How does it work with like in Express or most like JS-based GraphQL solutions, or GraphQL.js rather? You have this like context object, which you can add stuff to that's used throughout the request. How does that work in Ocaml-graphql-server, and how? Yeah.
Yeah, we have a context here as well, and in particular in Morph's implementation, we use the Morph context, which is a heterogeneous map. I stole that ID from Opium, which also uses an HMap.
Well stolen.
Yeah, because you can put whatever in it, and yeah, it's nice. So we're using an HMap for that, and we also pass that context into the GraphQL server that you can use.
Okay, cool. So a few more weeks, and then you're doing this full time on Zenit instead of TypeScript.
Well, my boss and friend said that I need to get one more that knows Ocaml at Zenit, and then we can put the native Ocaml in production. So
Nice.
We're hiring.
Come save Ulrich from TypeScript.
Yeah, exactly.
So how's like with native Reason, how's the experience around like monitoring and logging and those kind of the boring things about servers?
Well,
boring to me.
the logs library is really good. I have not dived deeply into it yet. I try to use it, just basic usage, setting it up in my applications and then using it for the logs. I know that Antonio has added a lot of logs to PF, so at least if you enable debug logging, you get a lot of information on every request, etc. I'm not sure about tracing and how that works, and maybe even integration to something like Datadog or whatever. I'm not sure about that at all, but the logs library is really good, and you can have different delivery mechanisms, so you can store it on disk or put it in the console or probably send it wherever you want to. Someone other than me can probably answer more about that.
I laughed a tiny bit when I saw those 3 lines in the beginning, because it's like, yeah, it's like the hello world of native Ocaml Reason, it seems.
Yeah, it's boilerplate that everyone adds.
It's like open belt in BuckleScript.
Yeah.
So has everyone had a chance to stretch a bit or getting something to drink?
I prepared with 2 drinks before I started, so.
Yeah, I got one now.
Yes.
This is actually my first day of vacation.
Yeah, same for me actually.
Congrats.
You're
to
also
us.
doing half weeks.
Oh, okay.
But okay, everyone seems ready. And it's hard. For those who ain't ready, it's hard to respond, but I think we're gonna go on if Kirill feels ready.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so I'll start. You can see my screen too, right? It should say the Reason plus TypeScript with gen type. So real quick about why the background for this talk. My name is Kirill. I work at a company in Gothenburg called Antura. So we have quite a large code base. The backend we have in C#, and we started experimenting with functional programming a few years back, maybe like 3 or 4 years back actually. So we got quite a bit of F# now, and it's established itself, at least on the backend side. In case not everyone knows, F# is basically like the .NET version of Ocaml, you could say. It's really similar syntactically to Ocaml, then there's a bunch of differences when you dig deeper, but if you've done Ocaml, it's going to be really familiar. And on the front end, our stack is actually React plus TypeScript at the moment. But yet again, since we're trying to experiment with functional programming and add more functional programming languages and concepts to our code base, we've actually tried some other alternatives such as Elm, Reason, and a bit of Fable. Fable is F# to JavaScript. With varied degrees of success, I'd say. And this whole idea that there's something out there that's better than the mainstream conventional way of doing stuff, which today is sort of JavaScript for the most part, is something that's kind of close to my heart, you could say, because I struggled quite a bit when it comes to trying to introduce new technologies or new languages into large existing code bases. So for example, we tried Elm on a completely separate side project. It was not part of the main code base. And at the time we decided not to continue with it. And the same thing with Fable, basically. So Reason was actually a bit different. But there is still this problem. Like, imagine even in a world where suddenly a perfect world, or a world that's close to perfect, where people just figured out that raw, pure, untyped JavaScript should be forbidden, or at least just stop using it, and figure out that we should do some more robust coding. All the existing stuff would not just disappear. I mean, we still have tons of code written in JavaScript. So at Antura, one thing we have to do when we introduce new stuff, while it's encouraged, we need to make sure that it works well with existing stuff. And with React and TypeScript, it means that we might have some TypeScript components already written, and then it's kind of tricky. You have to use them from Reason. You can do bindings, or we could just start by writing some new Reason components or pure functions and using them from TypeScript. So one of the reasons I wanted to show this stuff today is it might not be obvious, and this is something I discovered myself, how easy and fast it is to actually just start writing code in Reason in an existing TypeScript code base. So basically, it takes maybe like 2 minutes if you know what you're doing, and you can just write Reason code and consume it from TypeScript. So I'm going to do this sort of slowly, hopefully. I'm going to do this in 3 steps. Step 0 is not really a step. Just show that we got an existing TypeScript code base, which is just pretty much create React app, boilerplate. And all I did was I removed the log and tests and the usual stuff that people remove when they start with this. I added 2 CSS blocks, border 3px solid red and blue. That's the pinnacle of my CSS knowledge, I guess. So I'll have to live with that. And that's where we're going to start. So let's go to step 1. Just quickly show some code here. So the main app is largely unchanged. I added this sample component that I'm going to use for the demo, which I call TS component, which is the TS div. That's why the beautiful blue border. It just takes 2 props, a string and a number. It calls this function stringify number that converts the string to a word representation. So for 0, it shows 0, for 1, it shows 1, for 2, it shows 2, and for the full case, the number is too large, which is actually a bug now that I realize it could be negative also. And that's it. So what does it take to write this function in Reason and use it from TypeScript? First thing I would do is I would just grab the docs. And here we have actually those are the wrong docs. It's actually a fun thing with Reason. You never know which docs to look at, Buckle-script Reason or Reason React. I actually have a special section adding Reason to an existing React.js project. I'm gonna do both, but if we were not using React, then we wouldn't actually have to do this for now. But we're gonna install BS Platform and Reason React. Let me stop this. On that, and meanwhile we can follow the other steps. So I need to create a file called bsconfig.json and paste all that in. And in the package JSON, we'll need only this script for this demo, the watch script. So we'll grab this. So for now, nothing's changed. Everything still works. What we're going to do is we're going to run the script we added. Watch. And we're going to start by adding a reason file. So I'll call it string functions. And we're going to pull this one in. So the syntax is a bit different, as people who've done Reason probably know, but a lot of stuff we can actually use. Nonsense. Fix the bug. So that's the first place we can just stop and analyze what's happening. So we've created this function in Reason. Here we can see suddenly a small JavaScript file has appeared. And as we're compiling in the background, the BS compiler buckle script is picking up all the Reason and I guess Ocaml files inside our project and compiling them to JavaScript on the fly. So what happens here is I have a piece of code that's pretty similar to what we actually written by hand in TypeScript, which changes as soon as we change our Reason code. Yet again, just to make a point out of it, we haven't been using gentype yet. So this is all the buckle script compiler. We're compiling Reason to JavaScript. So now we don't have this, but we can just pull it in. And yeah, now we're calling Reason code from TypeScript, or I would say JavaScript. I'll explain why in a sec. But a few things worth noting here. The usual workflow that we use during front-end development with live update and everything, this does not actually change. We can modify a Reason function now, and we get automatic recompilation and reload in the browser. Same as we would if we're doing pure JavaScript to TypeScript. So in a matter of a couple of minutes, we went from a pure TypeScript code base to a TypeScript code base that's where we're writing code in Reason. The problem here, however, is that can probably hover over it. Yeah, you can see that the type is any. So we can still make some silly mistakes. We can write a string here. And this will not give us an indication of the fact that we did something wrong. It will just behave, in this case, incorrectly in runtime. Yes, we can even get, pass a parameter, or pass something else. Which is pretty silly because both Reason and TypeScript are like two strongly typed worlds, and we have a strongly typed function in Reason, and we have strongly typed functions in TypeScript, but somewhere on the border in between, the type information gets lost, and we're kind of back in JavaScript land with the JavaScript related problems. So let's go back to the browser. That's why I call step one, call the function written Reason from JavaScript. If you had a JavaScript code base, then you could do this without much difference. But step two is actually where gentype comes in. So let's go back here. Where's this link? So again, the same situation as with adding buckle script, adding gentype. I guess it's even faster. So I can just grab this one, stop everything, and install. While it's installing, we can grab gentype config here. And as to language, since I'm using TypeScript, I can write TypeScript. So I'm going to rerun the background watcher and the TypeScript watcher, Babel watcher. And the first thing that we notice is that nothing changed. We still get a reason file and we still get a BS.js file. In order to get TypeScript to kick in, I have to write type here. And immediately we can see that we get a third file, which is called stringfunctions.gen.tsx. Basically what it does, it re-exports our stringify number function, but adds types on top of it. So it parsed the Reason code, it figured out what types we have, and now we've got annotations. So to use it here, we have two choices now. Got the old one with .bs suffix or ending, and we get the new one, which is .gen. So as soon as we pull in the .gen, suddenly we cannot do any stupid stuff. We're gonna get TypeScript warnings. If we pass a number, then it works. So yet again, we can continue working with our standard way of working. We can change stuff and see updates on the fly. Nothing changed, again, in a matter of now probably like 15 minutes, gone from a pure TypeScript code base to a code base where we can write functions in Reason and consume them from TypeScript. And, which is most important, keep the type information across boundaries. So the last thing I wanted to show in the demo, and if anyone has questions, feel free to throw in.
I have a question regarding the types. Is it possible to export something? Can gentype be smart and convert something like an option type from Reason to a variant in TypeScript? Is it possible to have that kind of type safety?
Yeah, no, I don't remember. I think they changed a lot in BuckleScript itself as to how options, now I think it's undefined. But we can actually, after this last step, I think we can actually just play around a bit and see how it converts union types, options, stuff like that, if that's fine.
Yeah, great, thanks.
So step three has to, that's like the only React specific step on this like really small beginner like tutorial. The previous steps, you could use them with like a Vue application, you could use them with pure JavaScript application, jQuery application, maybe Angular application, who knows. There's nothing about it that's React specific, except for this step that's coming next, because Reason integrates especially well with React due to Reason React, and due to the fact that you can write Reason components or React components in Reason. So of course, gentype helps with this too. So I think I have everything installed, right? Because we installed Reason React on step 1. So as advertised with JavaScript to React conversion, you just rename the file. In this case, it's not that simple. I'll start by renaming the file, but I have to do a bit more than that. One thing we'll have to do is actually remove a lot of code. So we'll call this make because that's the convention. I'll call it React component. And we're gonna pass let this nonsense we can remove, no return. This is gonna be called reason div because we want the beautiful red border. Yeah, so we're actually gonna pull stringified number from. So, well, for starters, that's like half the code, 9 lines compared to 19, which is nice. Let's also pull this in here. So, because I haven't annotated this with gentype, we have only this intermediate BSJS, and the convention for Reason components or Reason React components is to call them make. I don't think it's possible to follow the React convention with uppercase anyway, so it's going to be exported as this ugly make, which makes it a bit tricky to import. And we still don't have type safety here. And this compiles, but it sort of behaves incorrectly in runtime. So same thing like gentype or gentype to the rescue. All we have to do is to add the annotation. We can also rename it to Reason component on the fly, so we don't have to make the ugly import. So we got this name. And let's remove this. Got some IntelliSense help and save this. And we got both in here. Let's just make sure we can't do anything silly. We can't. It will tell us that string is not assigned with number. So to here. So that's pretty much it. And again, reload on the fly. When you change reason stuff and change TypeScript stuff, it doesn't matter. I probably should have touched a bit on this. The reason why it works is BuckleScript picks up raw reason files and compiles them into JavaScript and TypeScript with gentype. So the TypeScript compiler runs after because it just sees the JS and TSX files itself. So it doesn't actually know that we have reason files. It just sees that, okay, we have a BSJS file and it changes. So Bobble or whatever you're using kind of picks it up on the fly and compiles it as usual. And because because BuckleScript is so fast, we barely get any overhead for compiling the reason stuff first. This is actually a huge advantage because if BuckleScript was as slow as TypeScript itself, then we would have doubled the build times or the reload times. But since it's so fast, it's just barely noticeable. So yeah, before we play around a bit, I thought I'd talk a bit about the adoption strategies. Actually, there is this this article that was written in 2018. That's almost 2 years ago, about kind of same issues that I've encountered myself when introducing new languages or technologies. And there's some like information about how no-red ink switched to Elm and such. Basically, the way I see it, there are two ways to go about it. Either kind of go all in into a new technology if you really believe in it, and either like rewrite existing stuff, but more often you just, okay, we start writing new stuff with this technology. And if we have to modify the old stuff, then we just rewrite it on the fly. And option two is this incremental adoption. So going all in is often frowned upon because it's usually associated with huge risks in different ways. It costs money. If it doesn't pan out, you have to back up. It costs more money, so you lose time, and people sometimes, or organizations sometimes, do not want to take those risks. While the approach we have sort of allows us to not take huge risks, but still try to innovate, and it involves like gradual adoption or incremental adoption. That was the title of the talk. So if we're talking React, it's usually you have a component tree, and you usually would start from the leaves. So you would want the same way as we had in the demo to have reason components consumed from TypeScript components and have the types defined in reason. And it doesn't have to be just components. It could as well be functions. So if it is a component or a function that only depends, a TypeScript component that only depends on reason components, then you can convert the parent, and you can go on and convert the whole branch into reason. Now, this is a great way to try a new language and kind of really feel the advantages and disadvantages and figure out whether it's something you want to continue using. If not, then you can back up. But hopefully, if you go forward with it, you discover some problems and some solutions, and you figure out how to solve them, and you get a better feeling whether this is a viable option. So hopefully at that time you can make a decision, and at the same time it's not too late because you can roll it back. But hopefully if you make a decision to go forward with it, then you can continue converting leaf nodes and branches, etc. And eventually, again, hopefully you end up with a tree that is mostly red, and you have this blue part that is TypeScript stuff that maybe you don't want to touch, but at some point decide to rewrite, and the whole thing becomes red. In fact, only at this point, when you convert the root node to reason, and you can really get rid of Bobble and TypeScript stuff, you get the full advantage of BuckleScript's lightning speed, because as long as the root is bootstrapped with TypeScript, you still have to double compile it. But at this point, if the whole tree is red, then you get even more advantages. So that's one way. Another approach, I actually wrote a bunch of articles about it. It was also a while back. It was more than a year ago. In this case, adding reason to a view application. I was just sort of playing around a bit, and again wanted to make a point that this isn't something React specific. Reason can be used as replacement for JavaScript, not necessarily for React. In this case, I have an example where we're calling the API and decoding the response in reason with BS Access and BS JSON. So yet again, this is possible. Define your types in reason, call the API. This is not the leaf of a component tree, but it's also in a way the edge of the system, because it's just the other side, because it's also code that does not call any other code, like reason code that does not call TypeScript code. So similar idea. So good use case is basically everything Reason is good at, and Reason is great at domain modeling with ADTs, pattern matching. State machines is one example. If you've tuned in for last meetup, Margarita was talking about modeling state machines. So if you have a powerful language, you might not need an extra framework such as XState for simpler cases. You could just use ADTs and the powerful pattern matching of Reason. That's an example, some real code I had in TypeScript. I think this was Redux. A lot of action creators. The exact same code, the exact same functionality can be written in Reason, and this little compact bit much easier to overview and much less boilerplate. So this was showed at the React Meetup, for example, a great advantage of the type system. One thing that I have run into that maybe shouldn't be necessarily avoided, but I had trouble with it myself. We have a React component that calls Reason component, just like in the demo. That's all fine, but then maybe it turns out that we've got a component library in TypeScript. So that Reason component needs to pull in a TypeScript component. Now, for the record, I think there is a way to pull in stuff from TypeScript into Reason also via gentype, but I never got it to work. So you can always write bindings. But what I've discovered was that it became quite a large overhead, or it resulted in quite a bit of overhead, because especially if you have another Reason component that you want to pull in from TypeScript that maybe depends on another TypeScript component, there's a lot of friction on the edges. So that's something I like to call the Reason TypeScript sandwich. Or on the backend side, it's C#, F#, C# sandwich, which also results in quite a lot of friction during the edges. So what happened was I kind of started losing track of where the types are defined and are they converted correctly and stuff like that. So it helps when you have a single source of truth, and Reason is really good at modeling stuff. So if types get defined in Reason and consumed from TypeScript, that's kind of a one-way street that avoids confusion like that. So this I would caution against myself, but if someone has better experiences with this, please feel free to let me know. That was all I had. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter or GitHub. That's my name. We can. I can take Pontus' question first, actually, but if anyone else has questions, then feel free to ask also.
I have a question, but we can take it after Pontus, maybe.
Yeah. So let's see if what happens if we have an option type here.
Yeah. So the question was, what happens if we return an option type? How is that handled by gen type? Is it possible? It should be possible because we can define. I think that's called some discriminated unions with the variants in TypeScript.
Yeah. Let's see. So the option. I just have to warn everyone that first of all, I haven't done Reason itself for like half a year, and second, I've been doing a lot of F#. So my Reason is super rusty now. How to do sum of 0? Yeah, is that correct?
Because the default branch is none, something like that. Like the error branch could be represented as a none instead.
Yeah, my Reason syntax. When I was preparing this stuff, I was writing match every time and wondering why it doesn't work. And we're consuming this here. Yeah.
We could check the compiled JavaScript to see what or the gen type, compiled gen type, right?
Yeah. So here we can actually see that it generates string or null or undefined.
Oh, okay.
Then here we can see in the gen type. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. Yeah, so null undefined or string. And that makes sense. I guess buckle script itself, I suppose that's undefined, yeah. My JavaScript is even rustier than my Reason. Then for use cases we have, yeah, here it doesn't work, of course. We need to option map or something. But this is, yeah, this is nothing gen type specific. So for discriminated unions, it's actually even more interesting. I think, for example, one thing we could do is we could use a reducer written in Reason. We could model the types, we could model the actions, and we could model, we could write the reducer function in Reason and consume it from TypeScript. I think that would be a bit weird, but we can just see what happens. So let's say we have page state or something. Usual stuff with loading and error.
Just to be clear, when I talked about discriminated unions, so a discriminated union in TypeScript is kind of when you create an object and all the possible object types shares a field. You could call it type or discriminator or whatever, and it has a string that defines it. And then you have another field that's the value. If you Google like advanced types for TypeScript, there's a good article or in the standard documentation. So, and that's because TypeScript has something called union types. So union type is, we can't really do this, what do you call it, natively in Reason, when we just say that something is, so a type is this string or this string. We'd actually have to use the string constructor in Reason to say this type is actually a string of the string value or string of the string value to be able to create a type. But in TypeScript we have union types, so we have the I guess they call it simpler thing. But we can use that in TypeScript to create a discriminated union, as they call it. And that's the discriminated union in TypeScript will map to this variant, which Reason calls it.
Yeah, it's exactly this ugly stuff I've showed. This is the TypeScript, or yeah, we don't have the types themselves, but all of those will become the strings and those TypeScript types.
So in Reason, the actual values start loading or not asked, or that's the actual discriminator. Whereas in TypeScript, we'd have to use an object with a common field used between the. type.
Yeah. So let's say we have this page state, page action, page reducer. Here, nothing useful gets generated. All right, I need to. I think it's enough to say that this one should get generated TypeScript because it sort of pulls the rest with it. Yeah, that's pretty much a TypeScript discriminated union. I thought it would generate tags for every case, but I guess the single case, that's called single case, just gets a string.
Yeah, that's a bit weird. I don't know. Like the last time I used discriminated unions in this case as well, as a reducer or action types, I would have done a tag object with a tag field for every object there in the type. So then we can basically just do switch on the tag property, and then we can actually get like proper exhaustive check of the type in TypeScript as well.
I'm pretty sure you're gonna get it anyway. So if we were to use the reducer here, you just pass in the reducer, yeah. So we need to import it. So, and yeah, so initial state would be not asked. Yeah, so you can't do anything that's not allowed, of course. And then state is of type, right? So if we were to switch on state, yeah, so you get auto-completion and everything. Okay, so what's weird about it is, what you're saying is you would probably want to match on state.tag. That's true.
Yeah, exactly. So even the variance without the actual data, you could just match on the tag, and then you can have a default case, which does something like assert never. So the return value would be assert never, and then you'll actually get exhaustiveness checking in TypeScript as well.
State tag. If we were to match on loading and not asked. Yeah,
exactly. So tag is pretty much an implementation detail.
Yeah, so now we can actually get the tag out. I guess we need to nested switch in this case.
But it's kind of like, so I pretty much grew up on Redux. I'm not grew up, but I'm not that young. But and kind of maps to that case very good because you always have a action type in your action. So then it's pretty easy to match on the action type itself. So then you know that every if you follow this thing called like the Flux standard actions, it basically says that every action dispatch should be an object with a property called action, and then there's a string value.
Yeah,
I guess match on that.
Yeah, so that's true. I mean, if you were to use this one here, you would have to do nested matches. I mean, of course, it figures it out at the end. If the tag is failure, then this is a string. If it's success, then it would be an int.
But I mean, I guess there's other cases where they're pretty much not optimized for like exhaustiveness checking and those things. I haven't used gentype myself, so it's just a question that I've thought about.
Yeah. So for the rest, it does generate. I mean, you do get auto completion and everything. So you can dispatch either start loading or tag loading success, loading failure, and then you would have to provide a value of the correct type. Yeah. So it sort of works, but maybe not the prettiest of results here.
We have a question in chat that says, so bucket-script generates JavaScript, and gentypes uses this JavaScript to generate types for TSX. Yep. And I believe does gentype use this JavaScript to generate types, or does gentype use the actual reason code to generate the TypeScript types?
So yeah, I'm the wrong person to ask this. As far as I understand, and I guess Cristiano can correct me. As far as I understand, it uses Reason to generate an abstract syntax tree that's used to generate TypeScript types. Whether it uses the JavaScript in between, I'm not actually sure. It definitely does pull it in and re-export it.
So basically, we're using two tools right now, and we have two files produced from those tools. We have gentypes, which produces the TypeScript type definition, and then we have bucketscript, which compiles the reason to the JavaScript, and those are two separate things, right?
Yeah, it's like 2 steps or 2 extra steps, which are pretty fast. One thing that's interesting, if you're using VS Code, I think that's the Reason language server that does it. It would compile this stuff on the fly without actually running this in the background. Let's just remove this, I suppose. Yeah, I need to get back into working state first. But strictly speaking, in VS Code with Reason language server, you don't have to run this part. I still like to run it because sometimes the Reason language server flips out, and then I'm not sure whether it's my code that's wrong or whether I should restart Reason language server. But with VS Code, we can like change stuff here and yes, wait a bit. Or maybe I played around with it yesterday. Yeah, there we go. It's a bit slower also. But yeah, normally that's the way you do this. You have a process in the background that does the pre-processing.
And I guess you could, for like your project, let's mash everything into Webpack or something. So you just start one process and everything's sorted. But I guess this seems simpler. I don't know.
I think there was some issue with that
Okay.
because both have watchers, but maybe it's possible. Not
I think
sure.
it's generally like discouraged to bake bucketscript into Webpack.
Okay.
I think so. So I have a question if nobody else has a question for me. So you've used this at Antura, I believe.
Yep.
How's your like general experience been integrating, like doing this exactly? David Sancho has a related question as well, which is how far did you manage to use gentype to share types between Reason and TypeScript? Oh, and okay, sorry, it's kind of a different question. We'll start with that one maybe. So he says he tried to share TypeScript records. So I guess like how far in the type systems have you gone trying to share things between them?
Not extremely far, I would not say. So we have, I think, if you want to know in more detail, you can check with Margarita on Twitter later. I think she did a lot of work lately. We have one like sub project that's bootstrapped with TypeScript. It's primarily written in Reason. So we don't do a lot of interop. I think it's just the index file that pulls in an app.re. So you just need to type the props. I know that we had trouble with trying to have like both types in TypeScript and some types in Reason and then pass them to and fro. So that has been a problem. And I think what happened lately was we just kind of revisited this stuff with gentype, and we discovered that it works just so much better than it worked a year and a half ago. So hopefully we'll just make another try, but I won't be surprised if we have like some loose functions here and there that had the sort of complex logic with pattern matching and state machine-ish stuff that we just have in Reason and pull into TypeScript, not even React components. But the answer is not extremely far. It's a huge code base, and stuff goes a bit slowish usually. Unfortunately.
I see. But your experience it's been good, I take it then, using Gentype, or okay-ish?
I would say okay-ish at the time. So that was maybe again like a year and a half ago. One thing that I kind of backed out of at the time, the backstory is we have API tests in F# for our APIs. Those are like real integration tests that call APIs, get results, call APIs with other stuff. Or like the results of the previous calls. And my genius idea was just to port this stuff to Ocaml, because F# and Ocaml have similar syntax, and compile it with buckle script to JavaScript that would actually do the calls. And I spent some time on investigating that and trying it out. It did not work as expected at all. Like the idea was it's just a bit of a syntax tweak. In reality, it was, for a bunch of different reasons, really, really hard to do this. And one of the ideas there was to use like this data calling library or part of the code base, both in the tests and in TypeScript code, like in the Vue.js article, that we would have a data calling layer that would be well tested by API tests, and that would also be used in TypeScript with strong type guarantees. But that we basically backed out of, and I think I wrote those tests in TypeScript eventually, just because, well, one of the things, it wasn't possible to do multiple assertions in an easy way, and there is no async await-ish syntax, or there was none in Ocaml at the time, at least. Which is a huge advantage of F#, actually. Async await-ish, like the monadic bind computational expression syntax helps just incredibly when you do asynchronous operations or error handling and such. So this didn't work with Ocaml at the time. So that was the negative experience. The rest was sort of okay. I would prefer writing more Reason, to be honest, but it is what it is at the time.
Cool. Any other questions? Pontus, how's the YouTube stream?
Let's see. No, it looks, or the stream is alive and well, but there's no questions.
Cool.
There is a beautiful talk so far.
Nice.
Comments.
So yeah, just to wrap up, I'm really looking forward to the next talk, and I was actually looking forward to it for like a month. And this is what I'm gonna do. If someone's using Hasura, you would recognize this UI. I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna click on this button, and I'm gonna try and write some Reason relay code. So looking forward to the next talk.
Let's hope it's not a massive disappointment then.
I'm sure it won't be. Yeah, but thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for presenting.
Talk.
Great
Excellent.
talk.
It's so I get the feeling we're pretty spoiled in recent land that we have Gentype. And also I know this guy called Jonathan, I'm not sure if he's watching this, but he's working on a kind of compiler that can take TypeScript and generate bindings for a lot of different cases, which is also looking really cool. So we have a lot of really good things coming here with Interop.
Yeah.
Should we take another like 5-minute break for drinks and restroom or whatever?
Exactly. And then
posture check.
Posture check, do some push-ups, those kind of things. And then please, like if you want to put your video on and unmute your microphone, and the thing I'll do will be a group thing, so to say. So it's like ask questions and But we'll take a short break first.
Yeah. So we'll
Excellent.
start in 5 minutes-ish.
Yep. Cool.
Okay, perfect. So
See ya.
I'll be right back. Hello.
I am back.
Excellent. I actually had to cut the title on Meetup. So as we added more talkers and the remote and English and all, so, but it's very bleeding edge.
Yeah.
The title doesn't say so, but
I'm gonna say so like a couple of times per minute, I think.
This is the complete opposite of gentype, of like starting with the leaves, and here it's just like
oh yeah, big bang. Like you can't even use half of the third-party libraries you want to use in concurrent mode and suspense. This is all or nothing.
It's great.
Yeah. Trying to do my very best to make sure people don't actually use this. It's too hard to integrate this into existing things. So my 1.5-year-old son is sick, and he's in a room just next to this. So if there's like frenetic child screams, it's okay. Somebody will tend to him. So
Good to know.
I might need to like re-angle my microphone some though. We'll see. Exactly, Eduardo. It's okay.
Okay, should we start? I don't remember what the time was when I left, when I said it was.
Me neither.
Let's start in 5 minutes.
I think we can probably go ahead and start. So so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Gabriel, and together with Pontus, I help run this meetup. So you've hopefully seen me once or twice before. I'm also partner at a Swedish IT consultancy in Stockholm called Arison. And so if you're in Stockholm and interested in being a consultant, please do reach out to me. So I'm now interfering with Ulrich's Gothenburg recruitment. I've been in the Reason community for not super long, but maybe 2 years now or something like that. And I'm primarily a front-end developer, although I've done some backend as well, or full stack. Or yeah, I like to kind of at least understand a bit about the entire stack. And I'm also very like I enjoy the data layer, which is fun, which has also led me to things like GraphQL and Relay. And Relay itself, I've been using that in at various capacities in production for like 4 or 5 years now. I started very briefly with the first iteration of Relay, which doesn't exist anymore. And then at my last job, we used Relay exclusively for the data layer. And I'm a big Relay fan, and I'm also a big fan of Reason. So that led me to start building something called Reason Relay, which is it's bindings from Relay to Reason, but it's only bindings for the new bleeding edge experimental APIs that Relay is working on, which are fully like hooks based. And this whole thing's going to be a demo, so I'll show you all of it very soon. So what I want to do here is I've prepared a small application, very small, but that contains kind of a lot of the common like patterns that you'd have. So it has routing and it has a few other things like you're likely to see in Relay apps. And what we'll do is we'll click through this app and then it has a built-in mechanism to like artificially slow down the server. So we'll see how it looks when going around without any delay, and then when going around the app with some artificial delay in there. So we can really see like the loading states and things like that. And what we'll do is we'll look at the app, and we'll also exactly Reason Delay is the new project name. But we'll look through the code, but then we'll try and, as I try and explain what suspense and concurrent mode in React is, we'll try and see how we can like optimize the app UX using suspense and concurrent mode kind of live. So we'll see how this goes. I really hope the demo devil isn't too close now. I'm risking it all on one card here. Yeah, like I said, just ask questions for everything. There are so many concepts going around here now that's going to be hard for me to know even what end to start in and how to explain things. So my hope is
interrupt you. Yes, like I just did, like from the chat, if people don't want to use their mouth to talk.
Yeah,
if you want to make it more like just intense. Or
yes, please just interrupt whenever. It's maybe not in mid sentence.
Yeah. But I'm trying to be a little bit
extremely obvious,
more aggressive than before.
Yeah, be aggressive. Okay. I like when the content is aggressive. That's nice. So
yeah, okay.
So I'll start by I'll share my screen, and I'm not a very what do you say? I'm not a very good screen sharer, so I don't have two screens. I'm just going to share whatever ways that I see. So I think I'm going to just close these things down. Although I like to see I have this one over here. That should be good. So I'd like to see faces at the same time. And Pontus, you'll keep track of the chat, so I don't have to have that open. Okay. So this is the application. It's a kind of just a typical dashboard kind of thing here. There's not many, there's nothing in the menu except for the dashboard, but you can click yourself up here, which will navigate to the viewer profile, so the logged in user's profile. Here we have a friend list, which we can paginate. And you can jump to users here, other users. And at the other users profile page, we have some tasks, and you can jump into the tasks here as well. And this is looking fine when running at a very expensive MacBook Pro locally with no real database, all in memory in a small node process. But if we redo this and we add some slowdown, we can see that we first get a loading state there, and then we get a loading state there, and then we see our content. And then if we navigate here, same thing here, we get a loading state, we wait for a while, same thing here, we get a loading state, jump over to this user, we get a loading state. Yeah, but still pretty acceptable. But if we refresh this and we add lots of slowdown, you see that this is taking a while to show the skeleton around everything, or it's taking a while to show the dashboard itself. Same here when we navigate, taking quite a while. The same thing when we go here, taking quite a while. You just see this kind of loading indicator thingy a lot. And the same thing when we go here. So what we're going to do is we're going to use suspense and concurrent mode to kind of give us more control over the loading states in our UI and our UI overall. And that's really what like suspense and concurrent mode is all about. It's about giving you like first-class control over your components in a way that isn't intrusive. Which is what I've, oh, sorry. Now you get to see me live here when I admit people into the presentation.
And suspense and concurrent mode, that's for React, right? It's not for Relay itself. Sorry, yeah. It's an experimental or soon to be done thing for React.
Exactly. So the background is suspense and concurrent mode is experimental React features. They aren't released in a stable version yet. A version of suspense is available in the stable React release, and it enables if you know about like React.lazy, which is a way of asynchronously loading components, for instance. So that's available in the stable release. But other than that, both concurrent mode and suspense are fully experimental. And a concurrent mode especially has a lot of buy-in. So you probably can't just turn on concurrent mode and expect things to work the first time you try it. But just to like separate these two, like suspense is about adding a first-class way of basically marking things as loading, marking components as loading inside of React. So what happens is the render function runs for the entire tree, and then some component somewhere says that, okay, I'm loading, and that's called that it's suspending. And this suspension event, kind of an event, I don't know if it's, yeah, that's probably not the right terminology, but you can think of it as an event, that then walks up the tree until something catches it. And what catches it is a suspense boundary. And with the suspense boundary, you're like in control of showing a loading state. So as a suspense event is captured, you can either show a loading state or show nothing at all. The idea here is that things can start loading at the same time in different parts of the UI, and that can then bubble up, and you decide where you catch that. Like using a component as suspense. In one case, maybe you want it to show a loading state together with other components or much higher up the tree, and then when you use it in another place in your UI, you want to show a loading state in a like a much more refined place, for instance. So like before I go into concurrent mode, are there any questions about suspense? I guess all of you have already read all of the cool tech blogs, so you know all about it.
But I guess you could say it's kind of the same idea like error boundaries, but you define a boundary that catches something. In this case, not errors, it's loading instead.
It's the exact same thing as error boundaries, only for loading instead of errors. Exactly. The error boundaries has the same kind of effect, that you can wait for an error to bubble as far up as you want, and then catch it or them together, kind of.
And that's basically instead of destroying the whole React tree, you can just catch the error, represent the error as another component instead.
Exactly. So moving on to concurrent mode, which is a bit more difficult to explain, and I'm by no means an expert on concurrent mode, obviously. But the way I understand it is rendering in React currently, like when you render your tree, is always blocking. So it always has to finish rendering. If you start rendering and the rendering is very expensive, you're going to have to wait for it to be done, regardless of how you or what to do. In concurrent mode, React has kind of learned how to interrupt rendering. So React can start and pause and then throw away and restart rendering. And it can also do this off screen. I don't know, it's not really off screen, but I guess it's a way of saying it, which means that React can give you a choice of waiting for an entire tree to finish loading, for instance, before you show it to the user. And this either wasn't possible or was extremely hard before concurrent mode, because you'd have, if you'd want to control loading from a ton of different components, you'd have to handle that kind of internally inside of those components, or build your own system that kind of coordinates loading. So concurrent mode together with suspense gives you a lot of tools to, again, like control the user experience of when you want to show things to the user, when you want loading states to appear. And so that's the kind of quick rundown of suspense and concurrent mode. I'm sure there are tons of other things to say about it as well. Then the relation to Relay. So if we start with Relay, which I'm sure not everyone has heard of, Relay is a GraphQL framework from Facebook. A very fun thing is that Relay, suspense, and concurrent mode is powering the new Facebook.com fully. So it's in production and being used by, I guess, billions of users already, because I think most people have the new Facebook.com turned on by now. So when I say this is really like everything's bleeding edge and experimental, it is, but it's still being used by, I guess, more people than the average framework. Anyway, so it's still like it's a lot of testing and a lot of thought has gone into this. Relay, yeah, like I said, it's a GraphQL client. It's a bit different to it's in the same like category as Apollo or Urkel, but it's usually a bit different to the other frameworks around. Relay like values scalability and performance a ton, and Relay has like a lot of opinions on, well, most things, but like a lot of opinions. And that's a thing that is, I guess, quite different to the other frameworks. The other frameworks are pretty much like, well, not most of them are fairly general purpose and very flexible, and Relay is also flexible in its own kind of way, but it's also full of opinions. And there's so much to say about Relay that I'm not going to go too in depth into Relay. The one thing I want to highlight before we jump into code is that Relay premieres using a concept in GraphQL called fragments, which I'm sure maybe most who've done GraphQL are familiar with. But fragments are a way to define like reusable selections on GraphQL types. So it's a way of just creating reusable material for your queries, more or less. And yeah, so I guess we'll stop there, and then we'll jump into the code zone, and I'll try and like explain as we go along here. Are there any questions before we jump in here? No questions? Excellent. So actually, before...
Sorry, I said one thing that I thought about like 3 minutes ago when you talked about it. I can't be the only one that has ever written a this.state.loading in a component. And it gets kind of messy when you have multiple components. And yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll get into the like main benefits I feel Suspense has, but a lot of the previous like way of doing things is it encourages you to mix handling loading states with your actual like product code, and it gets messy like really quick, especially when you have your top level, like the data that comes into the component can be either is nullable kind of, so you have to always handle that the data maybe doesn't exist. So you need like you litter your code with a ton of handling things that maybe shouldn't be handled that way. Yeah. So before I jump into this, I just want to highlight a few things. We're going to see this in code soon, but up here we have a counter that's telling us how many tasks are currently open, or yeah, I haven't really decided what it means, but we have 7 tasks. You can see this down here as well, together with a small kind of together with a small kind of trend indicator here. These are some like imaginary stats. All of these come separate, so they are separate things. And up here we also have showing the logged in user, so the avatar and the name, which is very creative of the logged in user. So the thing I want to highlight here is we have a nav bar, like the skeleton of the app, and that contains data that we need before we can show it. So we have a main query. If I stop this thing here, do some slowdown. You can see we're making 2 queries here. We're making one query for the, I'll show you in the code later, but we're making one query for the dashboard page, and then we're making one query for the navbar page. And a lot of the things with Relay, you're encouraged to use fragments as much as you can, which means that it'll be much easier for you to combine together a single query for your entire view. In this case, it's pretty common to divide, so you have one separate query for this part that's not going to change much over the lifetime of the app, and then you have a distinct query for each view, kind of. But there's no rule in Relay saying that you have to have a single query for a single view or anything like that. It's more a convention or a recommendation, I guess. There's a few things I want to highlight here before I start digging into the code. I'm using speaking of bleeding edge and experimental stuff, I'm using an unreleased version of Reason Relay. I'm using a pretty buggy, but soon to be hopefully good dedicated VS Code extension for Reason Relay that I'm working on. It provides me with a few things I'll show you later on. There's also a router in here that I've ported from an example app that the Relay team has put out for how to use like suspense and concurrent mode. This router is something that I'm hoping to integrate as a first-class member of or part of Reason Relay. But currently, this is just more of an experiment. But I'll show you just briefly how we have a provider here that I'm passing some routes. I'll show you how the routes look. Just briefly, like I said, this is nothing that's determined that this is the way it's going to look. But currently, this is the way it looks. So we're creating a router here. We're passing it routes. And a route looks like this. You get to provide it with a function that takes a match URL. Sorry, here it takes a URL that comes from the recent React router. And then you get to match on that URL however you want. And then you return either some variables that you want to use or none. And this is the way you say if the route matches or not. The thing you return here, not currently, like here I'm just returning a string, but this could be anything. It could be a tuple or a record or anything. It gets fed into prepare. And in prepare, if you have things you want to prepare before this route loads, you get to do it here. So the typical thing you do here is I'm preloading a query. I know we're going to the task view query, the task view component. And Relay lets me start loading this query as soon as possible. This means that using this, I can start loading the query, the data for the view, as soon as I hover over the link, for instance, or as soon as I press the link. So on mouse down, for instance. This will give me a preload token, is what it's called. In Reason Relay, it's not called that in normal Relay, so I'm probably going to change that. But and I'll pass that into this view, and I'll show you how that's used then later on. But this is like the premise of the router I'll be using here. And this is for a couple of reasons. So here I'm only preloading I'm only preloading data, but I could just as easily have this component be fully dynamic, and I'd need to import the code for this component as well. Having this approach lets me import the code for this component while starting to load the data before the component code is actually loaded, which contains the kind of query probably. So this is called this pattern is called render as you fetch, and it's the Relay team has talked about it a lot, and it's a pretty important thing because this means that even if I have a tree here of components that are all dynamically loaded, I can start loading my data as soon as possible, so that maybe when this component, the code for this component completes loading, the data will also be loaded already. And that gives you a lot of flexibility.
We have a question.
Yes.
We have Ulrich escaped the Zoom call, but he joined YouTube chat. And he asked, have you thought about using the routes library that I use in Morph? And then he said, I guess you don't really care about what router the end user will use.
So I have thought about that. I think it looks really nice. I have a user that's contributed to Reason Relay that's been experimenting with that too, or at least thinking about it. I think it looks like, I could for sure look at that. I think like this is maybe more, people maybe recognize this more from the BuckleScript world, but like I don't really mind. It would be really cool to do that type of thing. The thing I want to preserve in this router, and why this thing isn't just a giant switch statement of all my routes, which is because we can look at the user around here. I'm doing basically the same thing. I'm just extracting the user ID, loading that query instead. Same up here. I'm loading, the reason that these are distinct is because as this thing grows, you want to be able to dynamically add routes as you load more code, kind of. So you want to be able to start with a kind of flat top level route stack, and then as you load, maybe this view has 10 subroutes, and then you load that the code for those views dynamically as you load the view itself, kind of. But no, I think it would be really intriguing to have a look at the library that Ulrich is using and see if that can be fit into this for sure. So and in general, like if you see this and you feel like you have a ton of ideas how this could be much better or done in another way, please reach out and like open an issue on the GitHub or something. This is very experimental at this point, like everything else, but it would be nice to get a group of people together to discuss these things and find a good way forward, because I think it has a lot of value to ship a web router, for instance, that supports concurrent mode and suspense.
And it got me thinking as well, you said it, that it's BuckleScript people might be more used to this. And also I believe routes, as we saw, like heavily uses custom infix operators. Yeah. And we won't be able to, as of now, at least in 8.1, we are kind of not allowed to use them. Is that correct?
I think it's, except the new syntax. Yeah, the new syntax has, I don't think you're allowed to use custom infix operators. It's also custom infix operators. For me, it's, I like them, but it's a huge step coming from like a JS background or TypeScript background only. It's a whole new thing that you can redefine operators, and then that so it takes a shift in mindset, which
I mean, we're not here to discuss that with the BuckleScript 8.1. I just noted that it's not just
but to summarize and answer Ulrich's question, yes, sounds like a great idea, let's talk. So this is the router, and the implementation of it, I'm going to show that like briefly later on, because I need to change the thing to show you a suspense thing. But we'll start by going to, we'll go back to main here. This is the outlet, like the route renderer. So, and this is very like suspensey. Here's, it gives you a few things that you can supply it with to handle different cases. So for instance, if a route doesn't match, you can render what you want to render if nothing matches. Then you also have render fallback. And this is the thing that's going to be rendered by suspense if nothing else catches the suspension event from the route. That's a lot of words, but it's basically the fallback for the entire router. So if nothing else catches the suspension event in a route, this thing is going to show. And this is just the content load that you saw. Render
so
pending.
For clarification, would that be like the top boundary? We're talking about boundaries before, so that's the catch-all boundary.
The catch-all, it's a catch-all boundary for the router. So here's over here is the nav bar, and this in turn has a catch-all up here in the index file where we render. So this is the catch-all kind of thing. So it's a bit like, we'll see. It's a lot of things to keep track of. But render pending. This is going to be a bit useless to explain now, so I'll wait with this. But basically, this means that when React is preparing a new render using suspense and concurrent mode, you're allowed to render something just to show the user that something's going on. And I'll show you this briefly, how it looks in practice. And then suspense timeout. I've set this to 10 milliseconds right now, just because I want to mimic, when we start out, I just want to mimic how things usually work. But suspense timeout is the timeout that you're allowing React to take to wait for the new content to render off screen before presenting a loading indicator, kind of. So this is going to be pretty abstract. So we'll just go ahead and show this by starting to, we'll change this to 2 seconds. You're allowed to wait for 2 seconds, and then we'll go back in here. Here. Are we compiling?
Just a follow-up from Ulrich while we're waiting for the compiler. He said you can still use reason parenthesis proper with BuckleScript. And he says, I don't think it makes sense to make it mandatory in reason relay probably, but it's very performant and nice. Smiley face.
And I think it's a good idea to look at how you could let the user plug something other into the router itself if they want to. So let's see if this works. Now when I press this, you can see that I get a pending state up here, and then it transitions to the route. So the old behavior, if we go back, the normal behavior now without suspense and concurrent mode is that I press here, it directly transitions to the new route, shows a loading indicator briefly, and then shows the content. So that's the way you usually do things. You transition to the route starts loading the data, and then it emits a loading state, and then you handle that loading state, show a loading indicator, and then as soon as the data comes in, you show that data. Here instead, if we go back to, let's change this to, take 2 seconds again here. It's good. This artificial slowdown is interesting. When we start doing things in lots of slowdown later on, we're going to do a lot of waiting. But yeah, okay, so let's try it again. We click this, we get a pending state, and then it transitions as soon as the data has come back and React has rendered it. So this is a way of controlling the UX. So the idea here is that instead of transitioning somebody to a route with a loading indicator, we let them remain on the route we're currently at. And then as soon as the new route is ready, we switch over to it. And if we try this with lots of slowdown, I have to reload here. To clear the cache, spend some waiting time. Waiting. And then press here. You can see that first with a pending state, then it transitions to the loading state, and now the data comes. And this is all controlled via this thing, the suspense timeout. We could set this to 5 seconds. We could set this to a minute if we wanted to. It's up to us. How long do we want people to, or how long do we want to wait for data to come in before potentially missing or avoiding rather a loading state? And the thing you saw at the top here, the pending indicator, that's actually what this is. So as soon as a suspense transition, that's what that's called. When you press this button, the router will start via suspense, load the new screen as soon as it can. And whenever that's active, right away you'll get a chance of rendering something to indicate to the user that you're actually in a loading state, but you're not taking over the entire screen. Are there any questions to start for that thing?
I have a question from in chat. Where in the view hierarchy is the pending component mounted? Is it overlaid on top?
Yes, exactly. So I'll show you. I'll just go ahead and put this in our fat fingered. Just put this out here in your index. I thought that was going to work. It doesn't because it's set index. Okay. Well, it's mounted just over the route mount itself. So the pending component, if we go to that, is just a div that's fixed to the top and then put in front of everything. So you could we could change this to render text instead, loading, for instance, or anything else that we want to, really. And that's nice because then we can use transition delays and animation delays to control how fast the pending indicator shows as well, if we want to do that as well. Yeah, so that's the first kind of thing that we'll do here. We'll make sure that if we, we gotta have some slowdown here. It's not gonna be interesting. Make sure that all route navigations here now will be allowed to take 2 seconds before they show a loading indicator. So same goes here. Same goes here. Up to 2 seconds. There is, see that the request took a little bit longer, then we got a brief loading indicator here. And the point here that I want to emphasize is that you're in control of exactly how you want to handle this. So if you want this click to always show a loading indicator right away, you can configure that. if you want navigations to the tasks to have another delay, for instance, or another threshold for how long you're willing to wait, you can configure that. So it's all about like getting control over the UI to like match your individual cases you have in your UI for your UX. I've actually prepared, let's see here. I wonder what that is. So many components. Task list, perhaps, task for use. Yeah, so the thing I showed now was built into the router. The router is the thing that's kicking off the suspense transition, like it's called. I've just, I've made a small change here that'll allow me to just show you manually pair out kind of how this looks if you do this by yourself. So now with the newest recent React release, there's bindings to use transition, which is the API for concurrent mode and suspense that'll allow you to do these things. Like so a transition is just what you saw. Like when we're doing, you get a function here first, and when we invoke this function, anything we put in here will make React run that thing and then try and render that off screen and allow and set this flag to true, which is what we saw the pending thing before, and then wait for this amount before rendering either the suspense boundary or the content if it's finished. So if we start here, we set this to true instead.
We have another question.
Yes.
In the YouTube chat, it's Ulrich again. Does it make sense to have a shorter threshold of things that I know will take a long time?
That's a philosophical question. I'd say I don't know. It's kind of, I like that you can have a few seconds, for instance, as delay, just because you'll get a natural kind of new event, even though it's not a new event. You first have your pending indicator up here, and then nothing happens for a few seconds, and then you transition to a loading state down here. Like nothing new has happened. We're still waiting for things, but something has happened for the user, kind of. They see that something new has happened on the screen. I think it's common to go the other way around. So things that you never want to show loading states for, that you set the threshold very high, like to a minute or something. But again, like it's all you can tailor it to your specific use case. So it's hard to kind of answer that as a general thing. I'd say it's more of a UX question, I guess. Like
yeah, exactly. That was my initial thought as well. This seems to way more like a UX thing than, I mean, we as the developers, we have the tools to implement this, but it seems way more as a UX thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess you can see it all over the place when you're using something like Facebook. You have all these so-called skeleton frames and loading indicators, and it's just, I mean, we're on the web and we have to fetch everything to show it. It's not a native application. We have everything inside the computer, so we have to use these kind of tools to trick our users to believing things are instant or smooth while we're actually like fetching stuff from a server. So
exactly. So it's all about like, usually when you start out with a new app, you have a pretty fast server, and people are using it on their computers with Ethernet and things like that. And then like it's so easy to forget that your UX is a sum of your UI and the network conditions and the server and the time of day, and like there's so many factors that goes into the experience of your app. I believe
it's more about like perceived performance and actual performance.
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah. So that's like a basic kind of thing. I never showed this, but never mind. It's the same as in the router. This is a basic kind of baseline for how suspense works. So you start a transition from this hook. Whatever you run in here will be taken by React and rendered for, allowed to wait for this amount of time. And then you either get things either suspend, and you handle the suspension by showing a loading indicator, or you get the new content without an annoying kind of blink. And I think that's the, I'll show a bit more like in depth with the coordination of loading states here. But for me, one of the best things about suspense and concurrent mode when I've been playing around with has been the fact that it's so easy to avoid jank and avoid flashes of loading indicators and or flashes of loading states rather. So like refetching something that you know is going to be at least kind of fast. It's so easy to just like, I have to have a loading state, but why have all of this complicated logic for like per component just to make sure that this renders after 500 milliseconds unless it's done, but then we got to cancel and we got to handle all the events ourselves kind of. So it's really nice to have it at the framework level. I want to skip to a pretty interesting thing about Relay. So if we look at the structure of the application again, go back to main, we're rendering our router. And in this case, when we're on the dashboard, this thing will render the dashboard component. That looks like this. In ReasonRelay, you define your query kind of like this. And then we're using a lot of fragments here. We're spreading these fragments, and then we're calling something called use preloaded on this query. And this means that this query, whenever we get here, something else has had to start loading this query and pass the token down to this thing. So this, when we reach this code, this query will already have started loading. That's what we did in the router. And that's very important because of the things I mentioned about code splitting and things like that. So in Relay and in ReasonRelay, you co-locate fragments with your components. So here's the revenue displayer. If I go back to the UI, this is this component over here. Oh, sorry, the entire thing. That defines that on the type statistics, I'm using another component called stats displayer, and I'm spreading its fragment. And that component in turn is using another component. This is going to be a lot of like one of those Russian dolls when you, it's just a new doll, how far you go. But this is showing the value, for instance. And this is then using another component. So you build up your UI by components defining what data they need in fragments, and then also what other components they want to render. And if we go back here, I'm sorry, this is going to be a bit abstract for now, but if we look at the revenue displayer, the only thing here that we know is that we want to render the revenue displayer. It's down here. We know that the revenue displayer needs data from the statistics type, which is on the top level statistics field. But we have no clue what that data is, or if it's requesting all of the data on statistics, or what data it's requesting. And this will then get turned into one big query that Relay will make and then give data to these various components. But the important thing here is to highlight is that this is opaque. So if I refactor this component, or if I extend it, or add a bunch of new things or remove things, this component, the dashboard that's giving the data to that component, doesn't need to know anything about it. So it helps to think of this as kind of the way you're composing your UI together with React. So you have components, they have props, and then they render something, but you don't know, like, you know what you're supposed to put in. You know there's props, and that's typed in a certain way, but you have no clue like what it's doing internally, or how it's going to render things. You just know it's going to render something, and if you give it these things. So the internals is kind of a black box, and it's the same idea here. So thinking about Relay, it helps to think about Relay as kind of the React for the data layer. So it's about, rather than building one big query where you explicitly select everything you need to render this view, it's about composing together components. just like you do in React. So the data dependencies for components. But what I want to do here, if we skip into the nav component, which is this bar up here, this has two points of data. It has this tasks counter, and it has the name and avatar of the logged in user. Those two things make it so that we have to request this data. We do it up here. It's two components with fragments as well. So this is making its own query. And then those two components are spread out in these trees. So here's one of them, the navbar to do item count, which is this one. It's down here. And then the logged in user displayer is down here. So they are, of course, at different parts of the tree. But this means that we have to make this query here and then tunnel the data to these components down here. And this means that when we get here, this isn't a preloaded query. So when we get here, Relay is going to issue this query, start making it, and then suspend. So this is going to create a suspension event. And that's going to bubble upwards. As we saw, we're going to go come here into main. This is the nav. That's going to bubble upwards into index. And that's going to be caught by the general suspense boundary here. And that's what creates the effect of first having a huge loading indicator here, and then having the loading indicator down here. And that's not very nice because there's so much content in here that we should be able to show. We shouldn't have to wait for all of this data to come back just to show this, for instance. This is static title. The entire menu is static except for the avatar and the counter here. And Relay allows us to do a pretty neat thing, which is that, if we go into here, like I said, we come down here to the query, this component renders, we come to query use. Query use is going to initiate this query. And then because it's initiating the query and the data isn't there, it's going to suspend. That's going to bubble upwards, and there's nothing above it that catches this. So we're going to catch it at the general boundary, the catch-all last point of defense, kind of. But with suspense and concurrent mode, Relay will allow us to, instead of suspending at this place, suspend at the fragment level. So if we do this, render policy equals partial, Relay will instead allow the suspension to kind of pass through here. We get to render all of this, and then we'll reach this component, the fragment, and we'll reach this component, and these two will emit a suspense event themselves. Now, if we go back here, nothing's going to change, because if I reload this, we're still going to see a huge loading indicator, because while we do get this far, and here's where the suspense starts, we're not doing anything with it. We still don't have a suspense boundary that's catching this. So what we can do, just to demonstrate how this works, is we can go to the outmost level here. So this div is catches that one, and then we can also take this div and catch those. That made a little shortcut here for wrapping in a suspense boundary. So we wrap those in a suspense boundary here. Just for the sake of it, if we go back here, now we can see that right away we get our bar instead. Still a bit janky, still a bit jumpy, but just by changing where the suspense event was emitted, or caught rather, we get to render all of this instead before, because Relay will let this through and then let each fragment suspend if it doesn't have data. And we can just, for the sake of it, we can go ahead and say, here we go. Yeah, and you can see we see loading down here. So we've caught the suspense events, let it render even more, and then as data commits in, we're going to re-render again. And that's nice, but we can still do better. There's more here that we can render that doesn't have anything to do with the fragments. An important thing before I continue here is to, when I say that the render policy is partial, it's allowing, Relay is allowing you to skip through here, but we're still only making one query for this thing. These are two queries because one is for the dashboard and one is for the navbar. So nothing changes with the actual query. The data request is issued in the same way, kind of. So if we go ahead and remove this suspense boundary, we're back to before. But now we can, instead of wrapping at the utmost level, we can wrap both components with a suspense boundary each. So if we start by wrapping this one, suspense boundary, we'll do that. Wrap this in suspense boundary, do that. Now if we go back, you'll see that we see much more of the content. Because again, what's happened is this component suspends, it bubbles up, but it's caught right away. So it doesn't affect anything else here. And the same goes here. This will suspend, but it bubbles up and it's caught here. And of course, now I'm just outputting empty things. So it will get somewhat of a jank anyway, but we could replace this with, for instance, let's see what I call this. Yeah, I prepared, like a good TV chef, I prepared a loading component for both of these. So we'll start with just this. We'll show a blank kind of avatar here instead. And then we'll go here. What did I call? No, right. Yeah, I don't care actually about doing a loading state here because it's so little data that it's fine that it's empty. But we've gone from suspending the entire thing and showing a loading indicator for the entire app to rendering as much as we possibly can, which is kind of nice and an improvement. And then, like, you may not agree that this is the best approach, but like the point is that you're in control. You can do these things, and you can design your tailor UI as you want in your UX. And the nice thing here is we can do the same thing for the other routes. So here, when we render this thing, we've rendered ourselves, the login user. And when we transition to this route, take a while, we see that actually we already have this data. This already exists in the store. Why can't we just show that right away? And we can. So if we go to the viewer profile, here's another query. This is also very typical for a typical approach for Relay. We have a top level field called logged in user that just returns the user that's logged in. And then we've divided this page into, we have a header here, then we have what do I call it? Yeah, description, and then a friends list. So these are distinct components that can be reused throughout the code base, which I'm going to show you also that they are. We know that usually when you, or like for this case, when we go to the user me route, which is the login user, we know that we're always going to have this data in the cache because we're always showing this thing. So we know this is going to exist. So what we can do is we can go in here into the use preload query. We can say that we want to have a render policy that's partial, which will allow Relay to let your things pass through, and then each fragment here will suspend instead. And like we did before, when we do this, sorry, we got to transition from a route to this for this to make sense. Start from here. When we do this the first time, nothing's going to change because while we did allow Relay to continue into here, these are going to suspend, all of them. Not this one, because we have the data there, but these other are going to suspend. And we're not catching those events, so this thing is going to bubble up and reach the route suspense boundary. So we can do this. We can wrap these in a suspense boundary, and we can say that we want this to be a fancy Facebook content loader. Again, when we start out there, we're going to have to, sorry, this is going to be a bit repetitive because this only happens really when we're doing the transition to the new route. So if we now change to some slowdown, we can see that, oh, we get to render this right away because this already exists in the cache. So we're letting Relay transition to the route right away because the route is no longer blocking the suspense, because what's happening is Relay is letting this through. These will suspend, but we're catching them right away here. So the transition won't understand that there's no suspension going on here. We can transition right away to route. And there's a few things to say about how this is possible. One thing that's important to remember is that when you're telling Relay to partially render, you're telling Relay that it's okay to continue here. Don't suspend right away here, but rather let each fragment suspend only if they don't have data in the cache already. So what you're doing is you're allowing stale data, potentially stale data, to show here before, as you're waiting for the new request to come in, and then the data updates kind of. So if for some reason in some other on some other kind of device, I change my avatar here between loading this page and then clicking the route here, that new avatar would come in. I'd first see the old avatar because it's in the cache, and then I'd see the new avatar as the actual request came in here. Any questions about that? It's crystal clear.
Crystal clear.
Crystal clear.
It seems.
It seems. And this is again combining both concurrent mode and suspense, but also relay with together to kind of give you this type of control. And we could, of course, also say that it's not acceptable. It's acceptable to wait for the friends list, but if we don't have data in the cache for both the header and the description, then we want to suspend anyway, because it's not acceptable to show the page without both the header and subscription kind of. So again, like, you're in control. You get to decide where you put the suspense boundaries. Do you want to catch both of these, or do you want to catch just one of them? You're in control kind of that. And the nicest thing about this is I've made no change whatsoever to any of these components internally. Like, they're all the same. Like, if I use this profile header in 10 other places and that requires another UX, it's all up to me. Like, it's about composing together how the UI is allowed to change. So we can do the same thing when we go here. So this still loads slowly, but we again here, we also know that whenever we see a friend list, we know that we'll at least have the avatar, and we'll also have the name. So if we go into the profile, user profile, we can do the same thing here, the user profile. This is going to look a bit weird if you're not used to Relay first. This is called the node interface, and this is a top-level field that can resolve any GraphQL type in your schema. I don't have that many, I have 2, so it's not that advanced. But using an ID, because in Relay, all IDs should be globally unique. And this is actually what's powering this whole thing, because Relay understands that if you're using the node interface and you have globally unique IDs, I can always look in the cache for this particular thing, because I know that IDs are globally unique. So if you're using this, if you're passing in an ID that exists on the user that you already have in the cache, I can just go ahead and return that, because that's always going to be the right thing. And if we go in here, and we're in this view, we can go back here just to sure we're in this view. We can do the same thing here. We can go ahead and wrap these in a suspense boundary. Of course, now we won't have a login state because I just made an empty div, but we can, oh, sorry. All right, we got to set the render policy. Typing is hard, partial, like that. We go back here. Yeah, and we press this one, and it transitions right away. And then as the data comes in, it renders that. So that's a cool little thing to show more content earlier, kind of, if that's what you want to do. Like, you can decide for yourself. Is this the right way for this particular route, or is it, do you want to wait for all the data to come in, kind of? And this becomes more interesting. Like, now we've done a few fairly, at least, simple cases with avatars and names, and we can do the same thing for this, for instance, this task. If we go to this task view, remember that we have a title here, and then we have a priority. But this thing is also loading the avatar of the user, and then also the content down here. So doing the same trick for that is a little bit trickier, but can be done, because we know that we have these things. Usually when you when you show a list of tasks, you know that you're going to render the title, and usually you're going to render the priority badge. So we could do the same trick here. I'm not going to do that because yeah, it's going to take a little bit more time. And I have another thing I want to show you.
We have a question.
Yes.
What is the default render policy? Network first.
The default render policy is full, which means that don't render unless everything's there. All the data is there. You can set the default render policy app-wide if you want to, or you can do it per query, as I've shown here. So you could set render policy to partial if you want to for the entire app. But at least the things I've done, I've found that this is more of a thing that you want to do in some places where you have you feel you have pretty strong guarantees around your data kind of, and also you want to present something of value kind of quickly. So I think going to this route, for instance, if we go back here and, all right, we didn't have that data, back here, slow down. And transition here. This is valuable to show right away because the avatar is a bit bigger and the name is also bigger kind of. But if we just transition to this route and it'll look all the same, I don't think it's valuable to show that right away. I'd rather wait for more content to come in before actually showing that. And again, that's
update to the question. Sorry, meant fetch policy.
Oh, fetch policy, right. Okay, so fetch policy, for those who don't know, is how you instruct Relay of how it can use the data from the cache. And I think the default policy is store or network. So if the data is available in the cache, it'll render using that data. If it's not, it'll make a network request for the data. But there's a few other, you can also tell it to store and network, which means that if the data is available in the cache, it'll render using that data, but always make a request for updated data, for instance. So yeah, that's the. Any other questions before I have one final thing I want to cover here.
It looks good. We got a thumbs up. There's no more questions.
Cool. Okay, so the final thing I want to cover is another thing that's very experimental, very bleeding edge, and not at all merged anywhere. And it's a new directive in GraphQL called defer. I'm sure you've heard of it, a lot of you. It's not stable yet in GraphQL JS, but hopefully it's going to be stable soon. Anyway, what defer is it's a way of telling your server that it's okay to deliver your query in increments, kind of. So if we go into this dashboard, here, you see we have a lot of data here. And all of this data is fetched in one single request. But it might be okay for instance, task list and issues to just come whenever they're ready. It's okay to wait for them. We maybe don't have to have them at the right away. So what you can do, as soon as it's merged and not experimental, what you can do is you can add defer to a fragment. This, again, also your server will have to support this. I'm just showing that it's possible in Relay. So it's and you have to change how you fetch things. So you fetch things in multi-part instead and things like that. So there's a few things. It's not going to be plug and play this thing anytime soon, but it's a very cool kind of thing. For this demo, let's just say that it's okay if things just come in whenever they're ready. Let's say that we know that the underlying server here, it's making separate requests to other services, and we know that some of them are slow at times, like the task list is slow to get the times. New users is usually very fast, but can be slow during certain hours of the day. We can just say that let's just defer all fragments here, which means that you're instructing the server that just deliver these whenever they're ready. But you're still only making one request. So if nothing's going to change here because we're still, we haven't caught any suspensions here, but you see we're still making one request here. The other is for the navbar, as I said before. But still, let's see if we can see this. I guess you see what I see. So that's a nav query. If we look at the preview here, you can see that things are coming in here now in multipart instead. So first we get the total revenues coming in, then the to-do list, then the total users, issues, and so on. So these are actually delivered now in increments. So what we can do is, what happened here is this will, I think it's going to be actually automatically be partial as soon as you have the first somewhere, but I'm going to set this just because anyway. Relay is going to let things pass through here, and then we're going to reach this component, and this component is going to suspend until its data is ready. Same for all of these other components. So if we go ahead here and just wrap all of these in suspense boundaries, I've also, let's see here, I've prepared, where did I put this? I'm going to have to look for my, I've prepared a loading component for this, but I've forgotten what it's called and where it's at. So let's see here if we have. Gonna have to look for this. Right, stats displayer.loader. Go ahead and do that. Again, nothing's going to change unless I wrap all of them, because this is not going to be caught by this, but all of the others are going to bubble up. So I'm going to have to do the same thing for all of the others. This is a pretty like contrived example, but it's just to, I'm going to show you a pretty neat suspense trick afterwards here. So this is very much for demonstrational purposes. Go ahead and wrap all of these. Here we go. Now when we reload, you see that these come in as they're ready instead. So they suspend, but the suspension is caught, and then they flicker in as soon as they're ready. And like I said, this is a pretty contrived example, but I've had a number of occasions where this would be such a huge help in the UI. And like stats is a pretty common theme there, like having a huge table with lots of stats. And the product manager and the UX people insist that you have to show everything at once. But it's just not feasible to fetch that amount of data in one go. So you want to be able to show more UI quickly. And in that case, you could defer the stats points kind of and still show something meaningful before. But yeah, so the point here, again, like we're looking at this, they show as they come in. And if we do even more slowdown here, you see that these will show as they come in. Exactly. Now this is nice, but it's a bit kind of jumpy. So maybe it doesn't make sense that anything but total revenue is the first thing that shows. And React actually ships with some utils to control this. So if we take all of these suspense boundaries and we wrap them in a suspense list, we can tell React that inside of this list, reveal all suspense items forwards instead of as they come in. So if we go back here and reload, you can see that things are only going to reveal as the top level items come in first. So we've told Relay that, and React that it's only okay to reveal other things here as soon as this has revealed. And then this must reveal before all this other can reveal. And the same for the others. So it kind of goes down. And you could also, I haven't really figured out when this is useful, but you can also do this backwards. So instead, we're going the other way. It's only okay to reveal things from the bottom and up. you have to do. I have a very fancy random generator for the delay, so you have to reload occasionally to get the desired effect. But you can see here, so it starts with the bottom one and then bubbles upwards. That's, I guess, what I wanted to show. Are there any questions or any other like thoughts or anything that's not me talking?
See, we have a chat here. Maybe worth mentioning all the code generation we're using Reason Relay, parenthesis compiler, and some of the naming conventions.
Yes. Okay. So, and there's a ton of things to mention about Relay and Reason Relay overall. Relay has a very strict naming convention. So if we go into the dashboard, for instance, I couldn't call this my query here because the compiler would say that, oh, you're not allowed to do that. All query names must start with the module name, which is the dashboard in this case, and end with query. So it's extremely strict. And all operation names, so all fragments, all queries, all mutations, and all subscriptions must be named globally unique. But that's not a problem in Reason because we already have that constraint. All modules already have to be named unique globally, which is nice because it's a big hurdle. Otherwise, like most people, when they start using Relay in TypeScript and JavaScript, it takes a while for them to accept that somebody has decided how you're supposed to name things, kind of. I've worked in a code base that is, of course, nowhere near Facebook size, but still like decently sized. And the enforcement of unique names is so nice once things start to grow. It's so nice. It's so easy to search for things, and you're forced to name things kind of according to what they're actually what they actually are. You don't have to look through scroll through 50 util.js files to find like the util for this particular thing you're in. But yes, exactly. And there's also another thing that was mentioned there as well. It really has a compiler, which you can see down here. I've tried to hide this as much as I can in this VS Code extension. So this VS Code extension will run the compiler for you, and then just tell you if there's errors and things like that. But yeah, really has a compiler which traverses your entire project, finds all of your GraphQL operations, validates them, and also cross-validates them. So it knows about your entire project. So we couldn't do, for instance, this thing. We couldn't use a fragment that doesn't exist, for instance. We also couldn't use a fragment. If we try to spread this on the root type instead, it would say that we can't spread statistics on query, for instance, and things like that. So it's doing a lot of things. It's also generating runtime code for decoding responses. So it doesn't have to know anything about or very little about the schema and about your GraphQL server at runtime. It has generated that helpers for decoding things and traversing your responses at build time instead. Was that an answer?
It seems so.
Cool.
Do you have any like inside information on what's happened? Because you're using Relay experimental,
yes.
I'm guessing. It's been sort of experimental for, I don't know, at least a year, I guess. We were at the Meetup in October or November, I think, and you showed some Relay stuff. And we know that like suspense and concurrent mode, they've encountered some delays and maybe are redoing some stuff, so it's taking more. Is it like blocked by the release of suspense and concurrent mode, or?
So the way I've understood the Relay team is that the logical thing to do would be to wait until suspense and concurrent mode is released before marking the Relay APIs that rely on them as stable. But I know that they've been inclined to possibly go for a stable release before. React releases suspense and concurrent mode. Because what I've showed here, I've used concurrent mode, I've used suspense, but there's really very few things in the Relay APIs now that won't work at all without concurrent mode and without suspense. So there's a basic version of suspense in the React stable already. So if you want to use Reason Relay without concurrent mode, you could do that. The only thing that's going to give you trouble is that you can't control the suspense timeout, the delay before you show loading indicators, which will affect you if you're trying to do refetches, because that will suspend when you're doing refetches. Other than that, I think everything works in the stable version. It's just not as nice. You can't do all these tricks I've showed. Basically, that's the thing. But so as for the question of when they're going to be released, I think what's holding up concurrent mode and suspense is probably a lot of figuring out for the broader community that isn't using Relay how to fetch data and provide primitives for that, because they've been doing a lot of, as I've understood, they've been doing a lot of the development of concurrent mode and suspense together with the Relay team. So Relay is the only thing that exists that is fully integrated with concurrent mode and suspense, or not the only thing that exists, but the major thing that exists that's like tailored to work with this, and that's been worked through both the kind of React and Relay teams. So long answer on a short question. I don't know really. Like, well, I hope fairly soon. And for Reason Relay, I'm not gonna make Reason Relay stable before the underlying APIs are stable, but instead I'm taking this time to iterate on the APIs and the typing of things and stuff like that, and try and get this to be as nice as I can before marking things as stable and then locking down and not breaking stuff, basically. Because there's still a lot of iteration that needs to be done and a lot of around the typing that I need to revisit.
Yeah.
We have a question from the YouTube chat. How are errors handled? Componented cache?
Yes, exactly. So it's error boundaries all the way. So that's the way errors are handled for rendering components. So for fragments and for queries, mutations have their own like error callbacks, basically. So that's the.
Okay, cool. I think that's it, unless, we got another thing in chat. You should also show the edit query option in the VS Code extension. Heart eyes emoji.
So I can do a very brief like just show the VS Code extension I've been working on here. So there's a lot of like there's a lot of rules to Relay, just as I've said around naming, but that's also good because that means that I can figure out how to name things when I generate things, like through the VS Code extension, for instance. So it's going to be pretty broken, but let's see here let's say here that we're in this component and we want to add another fragment component. We can select this, use code actions, I think they're called in VS Code, and then we can extract these to a new component. They'll give us a dialog that asks us what we want to call that component. Let's say so let's display your value. And then let's say that we also want to remove this selection from this fragment. So that automatically inserted the fragment here, and it also created a new component here that has the thing I selected already set up and selected out using the use hook and kind of ready to go. So I'm working on a lot of those types of things to simplify extracting things into fragment components, because there's a lot of typing involved in that otherwise. There's also shortcuts, for instance, for adding a new fragment here. So we add a new fragment and it's gonna, let's say it's gonna be on the type task, and we get a new fragment module here with the task set up here. So we can just start selecting whatever we want. And we have this, I have the same operations for mutations and queries and subscriptions, basically. And then there's also a lot of things in Relay with, let's say, pagination, for instance. Pagination is pretty interesting because let's look at, we actually have pagination here. isn't it friend list? I think has is friend list. Just gonna say goodbye to the compiler for now. So here's a fragment. And this fragment has a bunch of directives. And these are all like internal relay directives. So this directive is saying that I want to be able to fetch this, refetch this fragment. So fetch new data for it. This is defining that this fragment can take arguments, that I can pass an argument of first and after, and what types and things they are. The reason that this is a thing is because there currently aren't any official support for passing variables into fragments. I think it might be I think it might be happening at some point. I think I've seen like an RFC for it, but currently Relay has re-implemented variables for fragments themselves. So this is the Relay compiler that takes care of all this. We're going to end up covering a lot here, but there's also a concept called connections in Relay, and that is a structure for pagination. And this usually like scares people away because you're used to this not being weird edges and nodes here, but rather you have your offset, and you have your limit, for instance, limit, sorry. Like, don't think too much about connections now. Just know that connections is just a structure. It's just a structure for returning a response from the server that's paginating. Then you can choose how you want to deal with connections on the server side. But this connection directive is telling Relay that this thing here, friends, we're paginating this. So this fragment, like I said, it has a bunch of configuration through directives. But then when we go down and look how we use that, we're calling use pagination instead. And the user here will have a bunch of things. So it'll have the actual data that we requested. It'll have whether there's new more data to load. If it's currently loading more data, we'll let you load more data like by just giving it a count. So I want to load 10 more items, for instance. So that's what we're doing down here. We're loading 5 more items. And this is really all it is. The actual, so a fragment is just a reusable selection. So a fragment by itself, damn it, can't be sent to the server. But since we've defined that this fragment is supposed to be refetchable, the Relay compiler will generate a query for us. So if we look for this, the compiler has created a query for us here. This is the generated file from recent Relay, so please don't be too scared. But it's like Relay just takes care of generating a new query for us and wiring everything together. So if we look how this component is used, like normally when you're doing pagination, you'd have to have some form of, if you want to reuse the actual query you're having your fragment in, you'd want to have your arguments defined on the main query that uses this the first time. But if we look how this is used, let's see here, it's friend list. You see, there's really nothing. We don't have to add anything here. It's again, like it's hiding all the implementation details. I have no clue that this thing is doing pagination. I just know that I want to render the user friend list component. That's all I know. I don't have to add anything here myself. This query looks like, yeah, it doesn't have anything in it. But the compiler, oh, right, sorry, I broke everything, I think, with something. What did I break? Or actually, oh, nice. Yeah, well, the compiler is gonna inline variables here, for instance, for us. So we're never gonna see that, but the compiler is gonna make sure that everything can get set up properly. So this is a thing with Relay where there's this very strong convention. You have to define these things. These things will have to be named in a certain way. You have to define this and name this key here a certain way. But as soon as you've done all of that, this is really all it is. Like you can now paginate with all of these built-in functions. You don't have to write any functions for merging the data back. You don't have to write the pagination query yourself. You don't have to think anything about this. Rather, you only think about like, I want to paginate the friends here. That's all I want to do. And the thing I was gonna come to eventually before blabbering is that if we remove all of these things, we now have no pagination. So we can even remove like this. We remove all of this. We have no pagination, but I've built into the extension, since everything is rule-based, you can run this and it sets up everything for you. Because these are rules, like this has to be called virtually this thing. I know it has to start with the module name, and since it's Reason, we know that the module name is globally unique. It's always the file name. I can use that to name this thing. I can set some form of sensible default here. I know that this is also bound by rules. It's the name of the fragment and then the path down to the fragment. So I can set everything up. And that's what I want to do with this extension. I want to make life with Reason Relay be just as simple as I can, kind of. And it has a bunch of other things as well. Like you can, if we add this here, for instance, we can add a few directives. If I do this, include, oh, sorry, it's getting late here. Our URL, it should, let's see here. I hope this works. Yes, it can detect that you have a variable that's not in argument definitions, and it has to be because it's like props with React. You can add that, and it'll add the type of it and inline it into argument definitions. And I have a few other things as well, I think. VS Code suddenly got very slow for me. Maybe it's tired of me. What do I have more? Oh, so if I don't have any union here, but there's a few helpers for unions and things like that. So again, like if you're using Reason Relay or interested in using Reason Relay, I would love feedback on all of these things. And like, especially if you find things that are tedious or things that slow you down that can be fixed via extension, for instance.
Sorry, I have to interrupt. This is super cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm super happy we started. We just started adopting Reason Relay.
Yeah.
Yep.
I spoke to your colleague, I remember.
Yep. And actually, well, my initial question, it was not to like put you on the spot, but I just meant the like edit, like the graphical view.
Oh, sorry. Right. Yeah. I can do that as well.
This is way better.
Let's see if that works. Like everything, edit it. No, I should have this in. Okay, just give me. Can Pontus play some like elevator music as I?
Why? Sorry, I haven't prepared that.
Okay, it's already installed. Crap. Let's see if I have this on editing. Sorry, I don't have it set up here.
There is a GIF, right?
Sorry.
I think you just need to enable it.
Oh, sorry, it wasn't enabled. Oh, that will help. Let's see here. Yes. Excellent. Okay. Yes, there we go. Thank you, whoever that was. So this will allow you to open this operation up in GraphiQL instead, together with the Explorer. It's not as impressive when you only have 2 fields on the type. So we can go ahead and just close. Oh, sorry, it's the wrong place. It's also not it's not optimized for large fonts. I can see. Let me just put on the light here. So there we go. Let's find something that's more fun. Maybe a task, for instance. Let's take let's just take the dashboard view. So if we take this one and edit this in GraphiQL, you get all of this, and you get the Explorer here, and you can select things if you want, and then you can persist it back to here. So it will save everything down here. So the idea is to have kind of a complement where it's when you don't really know the graph, like because the autocomplete here is nice, but it's very much for when you already know your graph quite well. You know what you're looking for, kind of. Because these are all like distinct types. So for me to know what's in here, I'd have to go one level down. And that's really what Graphical Explorer by OneGraph is helping with. If we go back here, you can see that we get this visual kind of menu where we can drop into, and we can look at the documentation at the same time, which I haven't really filled in, as we can see, but in theory. Yeah, so that's also a thing. Cool.
Okay, great. I think it's getting later. There's a lot of things we can show and continue with, but I think we need to stop, like
Yeah.
put an end to it somewhere. We can continue. There's going to be more meetups, so don't be afraid. We'll do this again and continue. Do we have any more questions, or it seems like everyone has gotten their answers? The YouTube chat seems pretty calm. Well, if not, thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you.
The amazing presentation.
Without a single slide.
Who needs slides when you have code?
Yeah. So I guess like we'll wrap this up here, and then whoever wants to, I'll stick around for a little bit, and so whoever wants to hang around, just talk or something, just hang around here. And I think you can even in Zoom, I think you can do like breakout groups if people want to. Yeah, I don't know. I think you're supposed to be able to. I've never done that, so I'm not sure how it works.
Well, if I have the permission to leave, I'm going to do that. My girlfriend is sending like emojis with like people pointing at the watch and things, and so and it's the first day of my vacation as well, and all those things.
Yeah.
But it was great seeing all of you, and I hope you enjoyed the presentations, and thank you all for the presentations, Ulrik, Gabriel, and Kirill. It's really nice of you to take your time and prepare this and show us all what you've done and sharing this with us. And I hope we'll see more of you in the future, because this is not the last Reason Stockholm meetup, and we continue doing this probably remote since, yeah. I mean, I prefer doing remote because it's easier to prepare, because I just have to sit here in my chair and do nothing. We don't need to find this space. And I think it's more fun to reach out to people all across the globe. So
yeah, I agree. I think it's much more accessible this way.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, people, feel free to stay here in the Zoom call. I'm gonna call it today for me at least.
Yeah.
I'll talk to people later.
Yeah,
Take
thanks.
care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stop share. Here we go.
Aaron, I forgot to ask, but do you have the same problem as the data loader tries to solve in Relay?
You mean that you're making you mean you batch things together rather than?
So I think data load tries to solve two problems. One is the n+1 problem. I think it's kind of famous, and the other one is that you one is overfetching, and the other one is like you want to join or do it in the same time, kind of one query. You have the same problem with Relay.
If you mean on the client side, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, you could have. I mean, with Relay, you're kind of you're in control of how you want to build your queries. So I guess the common thing would be in a view, for instance, to just build a single query for the entire view. And that would mean that your server could leverage data loader, for instance, and you get everything in a single request back. But you could also make separate queries that have overlapping data that return the same data, kind of, which would be redundant. I know you could have, for sure.
I also had another question, if you don't mind sharing the code again.
Yep.
I think just the one with the connection.
Yeah, we can share. Let's go back to, is there the friends list here?
So I'm very just nitpicking now. Would it be possible to take all the stringy bits and hide them between like I don't know, like an abstract type or something like that?
Are you referring to these things, or?
Yes, yeah. So have those defined on or within the generated code as a field?
No, sadly not, because this is so this is just GraphQL, and this is what the compiler picks. Finds.
Right. I see.
So this has to be here. I can't do any transformations in the current state, at least, that then ends up in for the compiler to read, kind of.
Yeah, I see. So this is like all valid, like relay or GraphQL.
Yeah. So it's valid GraphQL that relay can turn into valid relay that I then turn into. I turn into Reason after.
And I guess the compiler would also give you an error if you mistype something here, or?
Yeah, exactly. So we can just mistype things here.
All right.
If I, for instance, change this thing to just ustens. Okay, I've broken something else. Yeah, exactly. Expect the key argument to be form of some name underscore friends, blah blah blah. And the same goes for this thing. If I put this type here,
I mean that's almost better like error message than Reason.
Yeah, it's actually they're. I guess you've heard, but they're working on a proper language server integration from the relay compiler into VS Code, for instance. They're rewriting the compiler is currently in Node, but they're rewriting it in Rust. And at the same time, they're enabling so that the compiler in watch mode can also act as a language server. And that's going to be, I think, when that's finally ready, that's going to be really, really nice, because this thing I've kind of duct taped together here is a mishmash of various things that's never going to be as good. So for instance, here, it doesn't know that the fragment, this fragment exists, because the compiler knows it exists because it knows all the files in the project, but the GraphQL LSP, I haven't gotten that to work with all of the fragments. And even if I did, things wouldn't. So for instance, when we're using this fragment, in theory, it's possible for me to change that when I use this component in the viewer profile query, I want to show the first 10 users. It's possible for me to do this, but it's never going to be, unless I implement all of that logic inside of the GraphQL LSP, it's never going to be able to verify this. I'm always going to get an error here. But the relay LSP will be able to verify all of that and provide autocomplete for all of the fragments and things like that. I think it's going to be really, really nice once it ships. A lot of things that needs to ship first. So it's also they've also the most recent release of Relay has added a few like directives that help you update the store, which are pretty cool. I don't have an example here to show just because I haven't made any mutations yet, but it's pretty nice. It'll help a lot with because updating the store manually is probably the thing with Relay that people struggle the most with, especially in Reason, because the Reason type system doesn't really lend itself well to the kind of imperative updates that you have to do on the Relay store.
I think that was probably the biggest, I don't know, scare or like challenge to understand, especially when you're like adding something with a connection as well.
Yeah. So the hopefully, as if we add a mutation here, let's add a task. Yes, let's add it in graphical. If I just select an edge back here, then just an ID. Sorry, let's move this. Save this. The idea here now is that when you have this thing, did I break now? Oh, sfdiv is still gonna. Oh, it's gone. It's supposed to. Oh well, never mind. You have to bear with the squiggly lines. But the idea here is that when you return a new edge, you're supposed to be able to do this: prepend edge, and then send connections. And this thing will be a list of, I think it's ID, I can't remember. So you'll send a list of connections, and this will automatically prepend the edge into that connection. And then this looks weird because what the hell is a list of IDs here? Normally when you work with connections in the store, you have to provide a key and you have to provide filters and all that. But you can actually get the internal ID for the store for any connection by requesting __ ID. __ ID is always it's always going to give you back the cache ID for this particular thing. So it's almost always going to overlap with the ID of the thing. Oh, sorry, there's no ID on this thing. But for anything that doesn't have an ID, like a connection or an edge, for instance, you can use __ ID, and that's and you can then take what you get there and feed that into the mutation I just showed, and it's going to automatically prepend that edge to that connection. And the nice part is that with that directive, it's going to be really easy to do optimistic updates with edges as well, because that directive will run even as you're returning an optimistic response as well, which means that like doing optimistic updates with adding things to to lists now or in connections, it's pretty messy. Like you have to create a local edge first and a local node, and in the store it's very like cumbersome. But this way you'd only have to provide an estimate of their server response, and it could take that and create the edge and then put that into the store.
Well, would this require any change to Reason Relay or?
No, I just have to make it work with the latest version. I'm actually already. Let's see if we can see that. It's nice with Reason. I mean, you can do that in Flow as well. Flow has opaque types, but I don't think TypeScript has real opaque types. I can't remember, but it's nice with Reason because I can. So this thing is a specific thing. It's a data ID that goes to the cache, and I can type that as an abstract data ID type always __ ID field, which means that that's going to be the only thing that you can pass into that particular thing. So it's like nice with Reason that you have the abstract types also. But yeah, that won't require any changes to Reason Relay other than making the latest version work, which I've already found a bug, so it's going to be a little while before it's a new version of relay ships, I guess. So yeah. How far have you gotten at work on with this?
So we have, I guess we have like 2 lists. So like a contacts list and a list of like chat messages with like a mutation to add messages.
All right.
But yeah, no fancy, suspense or concurrent stuff.
No concurrent mode.
No.
Yeah.
I guess we can always add that later on as well.
Yeah.
To enhance.
guess it's also like a fairly big mind shift to get into that frame of mind. Just doing thinking in that way instead of the old way, so to speak. Okay, so I think I'm gonna have to go to sleep as well here. But it was nice of you to come, and thank you for all the good questions.
More than welcome. I'm also leaving.
Yeah. So I'll speak to you later. Thank you everyone for joining tonight. See you soon.